Thank you again for coming. So, welcome. I am Professor Inez Morzaku. I am a professor of religion here at Seton Hall University and also the director and founding chair of the Department of Catholic Studies. I'm thrilled that I have some very dear colleagues here and friends, besides our very distinguished guests, Father Colin Kay. He is the Vice President of Mission and Ministry. Where are you, Father Kay?
I am here.
Okay. And Dr. Michelle Nelson. She is the Vice President of the Board for the Board of Affairs and University Strategy. I see Father Jerry Bonapane. He is the minister to the priest community. I see Father Jerry McCarran. He is the rector and the dean of our School of Theology, Immaculate Conception School of Theology Seminary, and many other very, very distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, faculty, administrators. So welcome and thank you so much for coming. Before we start, I would like to invite Father Colin Kay to say the opening prayer. Father Kay, please.
Christ is risen. Inez, thank you and welcome all. Some of you may know from bitter personal experience, there are few things on this planet more loud than war, than combat. Our world so broken, so in need of prayer. May I invite you now, in this world full of displaced people and terribly noisy violence, may I invite you please, just as your heads and hearts allow, to be silent and still with me, as we turn with hopeful hearts to the one who promises us peace. Lord, may your will be done. May your kingdom come in us, through us, and all around us. Open our eyes and our ears, our minds and hearts, to you, to one another, and to all that leads us to justice and to peace. We pray this day. Amen.
Thank you, Father Colin, for this beautiful prayer. So we are establishing a relationship with the Ukrainian community here in New Jersey and making Seton Hall this center for dialogue, for fellowship, and I'll use tenderness, Father Colin. I know that this is our little terminology. Yes, we need tenderness in our world. Last April, we had several distinguished guests joining us, even from Ukraine, as we have this year as well, and we focused on the Ukrainian icon, a piece of heaven on earth. That was the topic that we focused on. how icons, veneration of saints can promote peace. This year we are looking at peace building, but reflecting on the role of religion and also diverse religious communities, religious leaders that we have here, to bring peace to Ukraine, to the martyred people of Ukraine. No conflict is solely about religion, but religion is undoubtedly important in many conflicts around the world. Better understanding religion and the roles it may play in peacemaking can inform many peacemaking efforts. Although there may not be one universally reliable formula for translating religious conviction and ethos into functional parts of peacemaking process, still, religion may have a tremendous role in peacemaking. So we invite you to this panel from three very distinguished religious leaders, and the title really tells it all. Faith in Ukraine, a witness to war. But faith also can be a witness to peace. I will invite now my wonderful 4 students here to introduce our guests. The first student is Jasmine De Leon. Jasmine is a junior. She also is a student in the Seton Hall Honors Program, and Jasmine is double majoring in International Relations and Catholic Studies. In the fall, Jasmine will study philosophy, history, and theology at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. And Jasmine is going to introduce our first speaker. Jasmine, please.
Archbishop Boris Gudziak is the 7th Metropolitan Archbishop of the Archieparchy of Philadelphia of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. He was ordained as priest in 1988. Boris Gudziak is the son of Ukrainian immigrants and was born in 1960 in Syracuse, New York. He earned a bachelor's degree in philosophy and biology from Syracuse University in 1980 and then studied in Rome in the circle of Patriarch Joseph Sipi. He has a bachelor's in sacred theology from the Pontifical Urban University, a doctorate in Slavic and Byzantine cultural history from Harvard University, and a licentiate in Eastern Christian Studies from the Pontifical Oriental Institute. In 1992, Archbishop Gudziak moved to Lvov, where he founded and directed the Institute of Church History and served as the chairman of the Commission of the Renewal of the Lvov Theological Academy. He eventually became the president of Ukrainian Catholic University in 2013, the first Catholic university established in the territory of the former Soviet Union. In 2012, Archbishop Gudziak was appointed bishop of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Switzerland. He served as a member of the Permanent Synod of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church and as a head of the Department of External Church Relations. Archbishop Gudziak has received numerous awards and distinctions, including the recognition as a Cavalier of the Order of Legion of Honor in 2015, the highest decoration in France, and a recipient of the Jan Nowak Jastroniski Award in 2016 in Poland, in recognition for his work in shaping civil society in Central and Eastern Europe. Archbishop Gudziak speaks English, Ukrainian, Italian, Polish, French, Russian, and German, and travels globally with lectures and talks on theology, history, education, society, and current challenges in Ukraine. He is the author of a number of scholarly works, including his doctoral dissertation on 16th century church history, Crisis and Reform, the Kievan Metropolitanate, the Patriarch of Constantinople, and the Genesis of the Union of Brest, as well as numerous articles in European and North American academic journals, magazines, and newspapers. Thank you for speaking with us today.
Thank you for the warm welcome, Reverend Fathers. Honorable Rabbi, dear sisters and brothers, it's wonderful to be here at Seton Hall, a place of welcome for everybody, but it has been a place of particular welcome for Ukrainian intellectuals and students for generations. I'm very grateful for this convocation and for this opportunity at the Paschal time to reflect together on this terrible war, the killing, the suffering, the destruction, and to do so as people of faith, as people who are celebrating the resurrection, as people who pray, as people who have hope. My parents were children, youth of World War II. They were both 13 when the war began, and they were 19 already when it ended. And then they were refugees for 5 more years. So their whole youth was decimated. They lived in towns which were almost equally mixed Ukrainians, Poles, and Jews. They lost all of their Jewish neighbors, more than 90% in Western Ukraine. Their Polish neighbors were deported to Poland, and so many of their own Ukrainian stock were deported to Siberia, including family members. Of course, family members were also killed. And growing up in comfortable Syracuse at a time that was the most prosperous moment in human history in terms of the growth of consumer goods and consumer comforts. I would listen to these stories, which are now gaining a new resonance. What is war? What is faith in war? And how can we witness to our faith in a time of war? This past Sunday, I had the privilege to FaceTime with a former student who was recently drafted. He's 40 years old, he's got 3 children. Some of them are adults, so that is already made him eligible for the draft. He studied theology at our school and runs a small icon shop, reproducing copies of ancient Ukrainian icons. When I called him, he had just finished preparing borscht, because he's been made the cook. Borscht for colleagues that were coming back after a long rotation in Bakhmut. The whole world knows this name. Small town in east of Ukraine, where tens of thousands of people have been killed. He wanted to surprise them with a homemade hot meal. He shared how complex and complicated things were, and mentioned that his neighbors in the army quarters were diverse, and there's a Muslim fellow. And from time to time, they have discussions about religion. A Muslim friend is trying to convert him. Hirori is a man of great humor. He should be a radio talk show host, actually. And I'm sure the Muslim fellow is getting an earful in reply. I hope and pray that someday when the war is over and justice is restored, these guys will share with us their witness about their faith during the times of war about their encounter with the other, and the other with the big O. What is faith? Maybe war is a particular time when this question arises. It is said that in the foxholes there are no atheists. As the bullets whiz past and the rockets explode, the shrapnel shreds. Ukraine is one big foxhole. Priests and bishops I regularly communicate with share that during Easter services last week, the churches were full, even though civil authorities encouraged people not to congregate at a time of danger, since the Russians target objects of civilian use or civilian infrastructure. It's really precarious, maybe irresponsible to try to measure spirituality, to weigh faith. It is best when we can raise our hands before the Lord and before the encounter of others with the Lord. Numbers do not reflect spiritual authenticity, and we can observe a certain conversation within Ukrainian society that has happened, but it is better not to pass judgment. People are praying. People are contemplating the paradoxes. And people definitely are asking for healing, justice, truth, and peace. Men of the cloth or women chaplains near the front line know that they will be welcomed. So let us leave that moment of prayer and the search for meaning in the relationship with God to the ineffable. But there are signs of faith and truth and love that can be seen quite objectively. There's a measure of faith in solidarity. And Ukrainians of all faiths and walks of life are passing this test with flying colors. Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of my brothers, you did it to me. We read in Matthew 25:40. I've been privileged to go to Ukraine 6 times since February 2022. I will be going again in June. I think it was the second return when I landed in New York and walked the streets of the Big Apple that I suddenly was struck by a realization. Seeing the homeless on the streets, I realized that in Ukraine, I didn't see that. Somehow, despite the fact that there's approximately 6 million internally displaced persons, besides the 8 million that have crossed the borders. Now some of those have come back. But 6 million internally displaced persons. There are not a lot of large refugee camps. You don't see people on the streets. There are no reports of citizens in territory controlled by the Ukrainian state, no reports of starvation, famine, death by hunger. In this winter, when Putin tried to break the population by hitting the electrical grids, heating plants, with an intention to freeze people, the general impression is that it didn't work. And even all those homeless people were warmed by someone. A network of connections and support within society turned out to be stronger than Russian missile attacks. Symbolically, the shelters where people could get a warm meal, charge their phones, and spend time during the most violent attacks when Russians targeted power plants and electrical grids. These centers were called hubs of invincibility. Centry nezlamnosti. Sacrifice among the citizens of Ukraine is a great spiritual testimony. This is a sign of faith. Hundreds of thousands are ready to sacrifice their lives and health and have volunteered to defend the innocent. And millions of poor people are supporting those who are poorer still. More than 33 billion hryvnias have been collected by the population. It's $1 billion. We know that a lot of people survive off of $200, $300 a month. And yet they have been sharing what little they have. There are big funds like this National Bank Fund, but there are so many smaller funds supporting the armed forces, the refugees, those who are homeless. In fact, everybody is giving. Everybody is sacrificing. Everybody is expressing solidarity. The culture of giving has become the matrix of society, a fabric. Майже кожен на щось збирає, кожен щось дає. We know in our communities, the collection has been going on for 10 years. Not to mention all the other collections that have gone on for generations. Tens of thousands of off-track vehicles have been purchased. Drones, tourniquets, personal protective gear. More than 3 million beneficiaries have received humanitarian aid from Caritas Ukraine, which is Catholic Charities, something that, among others, is being supported by Catholic Relief Services here in the U.S. Catholic Caritas Ukraine, the Greek Catholic organization, and Caritas Spes, the Roman Catholic organization in Ukraine. About 3.7 million humanitarian kits, in other words, emergency food packages, have been distributed. Hygiene. Over 100,000 people have been supported directly by Caritas financially. The churches and religious organizations are passing this test. Good Rabbi Father will speak for their communities. I can say that the bishops and the priests are generally in place. They're there with the suffering people. And yet, in the occupied territories, the Ukrainian priests, Ukrainian Catholic priests, have been largely forced to displace. Currently, in the 4 regions of eastern Ukraine that are largely or partially occupied, not a single Catholic priest is active, can be active. 2 priests, 2 Redemptorist priests, close friends of our Redemptorist fathers here in Newark, have been arrested. They are held since November. They, according to a report of a prisoner who was arrested with them but later released, they were tortured. But at this point, 5 months later, their whereabouts are unknown. It is not a surprise that the life of the Greek Catholic Church is being strangled under Russian occupation. Every time historically that there has been a Russian occupation of Ukrainian territory, in the 18th century, in the 19th century, in the 20th century, and now in the 21st. In Tsarist times, in communist times, in Putinist times, the Ukrainian Catholic Church sooner or later is banned, suppressed, forced underground. Ukrainian Catholics know what the results of Russian occupation will be. It's happening right now. Ukrainian Catholics, clergy and faithful of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, Protestant denominations, Jews and Muslim communities, they are all experiencing pressure. You will hear other confessional testimony. But already now, apparently 29 representatives of clergy of different confessions have been killed. And yet the bishops remain. Let me tell you about the case of, or mention at least the case of Kharkiv and Bishop Vasil Tuchapets and Archbishop Igor Isichenko, now retired. I had regular contact with them for months as daily Kharkiv was being bombarded. And I found that very often my anxiety was allayed by their faith, their confidence. Keep calm and carry on. Bishop Isichenko's apartment was destroyed. He moved in with Bishop Vasil Tuchapets. And together they distributed food. As you know, the Greek Catholic community in Kharkiv is really microscopic. It's very small, just a few parishes in a big city of more than 2 million people. But their witness was clear. Because in the end, dear friends, that is what the Lord asks of us. The Lord doesn't ask that we succeed, that we become rich, that we become powerful or strong. the Lord asks us to be true to his relationship with us, that we love, that we serve, that we support each other. And so these little Greek Catholic parishes, near the front line and farther from the front line, became humanitarian aid hubs. I think it's important to note the broader Catholic solidarity. 6.8 million Ukrainian displaced persons passed through Poland. Caritas Poland delivered more than 15.7 million food packages. In Slovakia, the Catholic Church was very hospitable. We have many qualms with Hungarian political positions, but it cannot be denied that many Ukrainians were received, many refugees were received in Hungary. The Orthodox and Catholic populations of Romania were particularly hospitable. And Rabbi Blake will speak about how the Jewish communities in Central and Eastern Europe have welcomed refugees from Ukraine. There's no clear statistic about American Catholic contributions, but I believe that American Catholics in the pews have contributed about $250 million, about $250 million for humanitarian aid in Ukraine. At different times, Ukrainians and others have seen that the statements from the Holy See and from Pope Francis have lacked clarity or been ambiguous. The Pope has actually even apologized for some of them. But for the whole period of this full-scale invasion, Pope Francis has been speaking about Ukraine at almost every audience. And there's 2 a week, one on Wednesday and one on Sunday. His voice brings the issue to the countries and the continents where there's little consciousness about Ukraine. Africa, Asia, South America. Twice a week, his lament at the suffering and injustices that Ukrainians are suffering is voiced. I'd like to share with you something that is maybe now still a hypothesis of mine, which needs research, both archival and oral history, but about which I am pretty confident. I believe that there's no good deed, no good stance that ultimately does not bring fruit some way, somehow, in some time. It encourages us to witness when we come to believe in this truth. I believe that the social teaching of the Catholic Church in its modern format, formulated first by Pope Leo XIII in 1891, in the epical encyclical Rerum Novarum, where the rights and duties of capital and labor were discussed in the face of rising capitalism and industrialization, and in answer to the ideologies of communism and socialism at the end of the 19th century. I believe that these principles have forged and have formed Ukraine's response. Metropolitan Andrei Sheptytsky, if you know, was a scion of a Polonized noble family, a count. His family were actually billionaires. And through the inscrutable touch of the Lord, he decided to leave the Polish ethnic and Roman Catholic community to become a Ukrainian Greek Catholic. This, of course, inspired great opposition from everybody, including his father. And it took Pope Leo XIII's personal blessing to open the road for this passage. And so, young Andrei Sheptytsky, who at 35 became the head of the church, had a special attention to the teachings of this prophetic pontiff. And already in the 4th year of his service, he issued a broad pastoral letter on the social question. And then he continued for the next 40 years in clear, understandable doses, sometimes using hillbilly language, to bring the message, the social gospel, to the people in his charge. 40 years of preparation for calamity. 40 years of careful work, of witnessing not only through word, but also through the creation of structures, cooperatives, different economic ventures, social projects, humanitarian aid institutions. He was an ethnarch for the stateless Ukrainians. And he led the people through the most tragic pages of their history. 2 world wars, failed struggles for independence, Polish rule, Austrian rule, Russian imperial rule, 2 Soviet occupations, and a Nazi one, during which he issued his famous encyclical, Thou Shalt Not Kill, responding to the violence, war violence, and to the Holocaust. It was with this social matrix in the thoughts, hearts, and minds of the population that the Roman Catholic Church was forced into the underground. For 40 years, in impossible circumstances, the light was carried through the tunnel. And then at the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, this minority church, which even today constitutes only 8% of the population, emerged with a unique moral authority. Sheptytsky passed on the baton to Patriarch Joseph Slipy, man of unbreakable spirit and witness who spent 18 years in the Gulag and then for 21 years witnessed in the free world. I don't know for sure, but maybe he visited Seton Hall. He was definitely in Newark, and I'm sure there are people here that remember encounters with him. In Newark. That's Sheptytsky. I'm talking about Slipy, who came here in the 60s and 70s. In the underground, there was now the blessed Vasily Velichkovsky, who followed Slipy, and then Volodymyr Stirnyuk. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Miroslav Ivan Lubachevsky tirelessly tried to promote this social consciousness. I was there and I was present. I was one of his ghostwriters, for example, for a document insisting that Ukrainian Greek Catholic clergy not lobby for political candidates during elections, that the church not be manipulated by the political process. Of more recent memory is the singular moral authority of his beatitude, Lubomir Huzar. I remember, Rabbi, when you in his beatitude showed up at the Ukrainian Catholic University, and some people that didn't know who was who, they asked, who's the rabbi? You can still see billboards today, 5 years after his death in Kyiv, with certain statements of Lubomir Huzar. Ukraine's not divided between East and West. It's divided between those who love Ukraine and those who don't, and many others. And today we have the energetic, smiling head of our church, Sviatoslav Shevchuk. This Catholic social doctrine today characterizes all of American society, Ukrainian society. But if you go back to the Maidan of 2004, and I don't know if any of you were there in Kyiv, the majority of that Maidan was from Western Ukraine. Whether those people were card-carrying, church-going Greek Catholics or not, they were formed by that vision given by Pope Leo, Sheptytsky, C.P., Bachivsky, Huzar, etc. A plurality of the Maidan in 213 and 214 was also Eastern Catholic. Today, Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava, falls off the lips of the president, of people from Luhansk, Ukrainian refugees from Crimea, Russian-speaking Ukrainian soldiers. Just 5 years ago, 10 years ago, this was an exclusively Western Ukrainian statement, which was called Banderite and something ostracized in the greater Ukrainian consciousness. It is possible for the salt to give flavor to the whole meal. It is possible for yeast to give growth. And if he ever desires to have a beer with me, I will explain to President Zelensky how he, consciously or not, became a student in this school of Catholic social doctrine. What are the 4 main points? God-given human dignity, solidarity, subsidiarity, meaning bringing things down to a lower level, giving people responsibility, having people take authority, and the common good. You who have been following this war and have been inspired by the Ukrainian response, you know that this is a struggle for God-given human dignity, expressed through solidarity, with great subsidiarity. Even militarily, the generals say there's subsidiarity in the Ukrainian army as opposed to the hierarchical top-down approach of the Russians. And a great effort for the common good. It is unpleasant to do so, but I need to say something about the lack of witness, particularly of the Russian Orthodox Church. Patriarch Kirill has become a primary speaker, giving jihadi-like promises to Russian soldiers. The Church realizes, I quote, that if someone driven by a sense of duty and the need to honor his oath stays loyal to his vocation, i.e. goes in the attack forces in Ukraine and dies while carrying out his military duty, then he is without any doubt doing a deed that is equal to sacrifice. He sacrifices himself for others, and therefore we believe that this sacrifice washes away all the sins that a person has committed. This was Patriarch Kirill on September 25th of last year. Sergei Chapnin, who used to be the deputy head of the publications department under Kirill in Moscow, of the Moscow Patriarchate, now he is at Fordham University at the Orthodox Christian Studies Center. In an open letter of 2 months ago to the bishops of the Russian Orthodox Church, wrote, an Orthodox theologian, "Now," I quote extensively, "during the military attack of Russia on Ukraine, I have totally ceased to understand you, my bishops. I hear you uttering nothing but state propaganda cliches, disguised as pious words of church message, and dubious theological formulas which lead you and your flock away from the gospel and toward an imperial pagan cult centered on power, wealth, and violence. I think you share the blame for it. I see that for many of you, it is a conscious choice. Now, a year after the beginning of Russian aggression, I must say directly, Patriarch Kirill is the first among those who justify war crimes. In his sermons, he proclaims war theology, using arguments that flagrantly contradict the gospel and the teaching of the church. I will not speak about them in detail. You certainly know them all and probably repeat them regularly. I beseech you to actively oppose lies and falsehood, to stop supporting and justifying the war, to stop blessing the soldiers and the weapons, to make it clear that those guilty of military crimes cannot cross the threshold of the church without repentance, still less take part in the holy mysteries, to call everyone to a just peace. The Russian church will have to relearn speaking about truth, about compassion, about genuine peacemaking, about a just peace. The Russian church will have to see the sufferings of the peaceful people of Ukraine and the crimes that the Russian army has committed on the occupied territories. Not only to see, but to recognize them, to comprehend them, and to bring itself to offer repentance for having taken part in them. Without that, it will have no future. There are almost 400 bishops in the Russian Orthodox Church in Russia. Not a single bishop has spoken out against this war. There are 40,000 priests and deacons in the Russian Orthodox Church globally. Only 300 of them signed a public statement against the war, most of them outside of Russia. 700 university rectors in Russia signed a public statement in support of the war. This is a deep problem. It's not just a Putin problem. It's not just a Kirill problem. There are far too few voices in Russia willing to witness. And so we stand and pray. We observe as David resists Goliath. We remind the world that in 1994, Ukraine had the third biggest nuclear arsenal in the world. More nukes than China, France, and Great Britain put together. And it unilaterally, along with Belarus and Kazakhstan, they became the first countries to ever give up nuclear weapons. Even peacemakers today forget that. On August 26th in a 90-minute conversation with Pope Francis, I reminded the Holy Father, the Lamb of God who gives up weapons. The country that had 900,000 soldiers in 1991, reducing that number to 150,000 on paper in 2014, of which only 15,000 were battle ready, was not a country preparing for aggression. I believe Ukrainians have demonstrated a prophetic witness to the world, giving up their nukes, crawling out of a genocidal past during which 15 million people were killed in the 20th century on Ukrainian lands, trying to foster a democracy, electing 6 different presidents, changing the guard, speaking freely in the press, allowing for religious plurality, creating the All-Ukrainian Council of Churches and religious organizations of which Rabbi Blake was a founding member. The Lord will not forsake his people. The sacrifices, the pure sacrifices. And many of us have friends, disciples, students who have given their lives. There's much to reflect upon. The call of faith is deep. And today that voice is speaking to the world. And I thank again Seton Hall for being a carrier of that voice.
Rabbi Blake is originally from Brooklyn, New York. He began his rabbinical studies in Chicago and studied at the Carlin Stalin Rabbinical Institute in Jerusalem from 1984 to 1986 before receiving his ordination at Yeshiva Carlin Stalin back in New York City. Rabbi Blake is married and has 8 children and 2 grandchildren. In 1989, Rabbi Blake and his wife moved to Kyiv, Ukraine. In 1990, Rabbi Blake was appointed Chief Rabbi of Kyiv and Ukraine and has served ever since. As chief, Rabbi was tasked with restoring all facets of Jewish life and education in Ukraine after its destruction before and during the Holocaust, and he has made tremendous efforts to bring about a renaissance in Jewish education and welfare. In 1997, the President of Israel honored Rabbi Blake with the International Award of Jerusalem for his contributions to the development of Jewish education, including the foundation of many educational institutes. In 1992, Rabbi Blake founded the Union of Jewish Religious Organizations of Ukraine. He currently serves as the organization's president. He was a co-founder of the Jewish Confederation of Ukraine in 1999. Rabbi Blake is dedicated to expanding charitable activities and care for the poor, as well as securing the return of Jewish property that was confiscated by the Soviet Union. Additionally, he founded and assisted living facility for Holocaust survivors that opened in Kyiv in 2005. In 1999, Rabbi Blake was awarded the Medal for Outstanding Service, 3rd degree, for his outstanding contribution to the development of Ukraine. Rabbi Blake has brought about significant advances in improving interreligious and interethnic relations in Ukraine and around the world. In 1996, he became a member of the executive board of the World Jewish Congress and currently served as vice president for many years. In 1994, he was a founding member of the Council of Churches and Religious Organizations of Ukraine. It is an honor to have Rabbi Yaakov Dov Blake share with us today. Welcome to Seton Hall.
Thank you very, very much. And after the moving words of my colleague, Archbishop Metropolitan Jacques, it really is, it was moving to hear everything, including the history. But as I like to tell my students and disciples, we are students of current events more than students of history. We can affect the way things happen with current events, although it is important for us to continue to study history. Personally, I did grow up in Brooklyn, New York, or I'm still in the process of growing up. I spent my childhood in Brooklyn, New York. And my grandparents were born in the United States of America. My father's parents, my mother's mother was born in the United States. My mother's father immigrated from what was then Poland. He spoke fluent Russian. He was born in Bialystok, Brest-Litovsk. We're not sure exactly where, but the greatest compliment in my mother's house growing up was, "Wow, you're a Bialystoker kid." So we know that was really something great for them. Actually, my great-grandparents came from Ukraine, from Western Ukraine, what we called Galicia by the Jews. They were Galicianer Jews from Chorostkiv and from what was then Stanislav, now Ivano-Frankivsk. However, being a third-generation American, all this didn't mean much to anyone. It wasn't even part of our sort of cognizant history that, oh, we come from Western Ukraine. We were Americans, Yankees, grown up, living the American experience. Very often people ask if my travel to the former Soviet Union in the 1980s had to do with the fact that my great-grandparents came from Ukraine. The answer is no. Nothing to do with it, just had to do with me not being able to find a job in the United States. Soviet Union was much more exciting. Grew up learning about the evil empire, and obviously greatly challenged by the ability and the opportunity to travel to the former Soviet Union and meet with Jews who grew up in the former Soviet Union. There's one story that changed my life. And that was my first visit to the former Soviet Union, 1988. At that time, travel by foreigners especially was very, very, very limited. Every city that we wanted to visit, we had to have a special visa for it. And we came as a group of religious Jews, some rabbis, just some plain Jews, just mainly to visit graves of holy rabbis that were buried in Ukraine. That was the main point of our visit. However, as we understand it, visiting the live is always much more exciting and much more meaningful. So even though we were like the first group that got to this grave and to that grave, we spent the Sabbath in Kiev at the synagogue. And Sunday we had a plan to go visit Western Ukraine, Volyn, a town called Mliniv, which is Rovinsky Oblast. And they refused us permission. On Saturday morning, we got notification that they're not going to allow us to travel to Mliniv. However, if we order the bus and the tour guide, whom we know they worked for, today we can go to Uman on Sunday. Uman was just being opened. Today, everyone knows about Uman. And one of the rabbis that was with us said that for us as Jews, it's not proper for us to order buses and to take care of any travel plans on the Sabbath, and therefore we'll just stay in Kiev. And we gave up our trip to Uman and decided we'll just spend the day Sunday in Kiev, which we did. And we went to visit the cemetery, the Jewish cemetery in Kiev. And when we got there, the place was packed with Jews, live ones. And when they saw a group of Hasidic Jews, they couldn't believe what they were seeing, to the extent that they came over and some of them were touching us to see if this was real and not a dream. Again, this was 1988. No internet, Soviet Union, Kiev. They didn't even know that there were still Jews around in the world. And definitely Jews that spoke Yiddish. It was like for them really, really something very moving. And I think that was very moving for us as well, for the group to meet with these Jews. We had seen and met many, many Soviet Jews when they came out to the United States. But we always looked at them as running away from the Soviets or running away from their Judaism. We never understood where they were coming from. We never understood the depth of what the Soviets were successful in doing by tearing people away from their faith. And that changed it. It changed it for us, changed it for me. I never looked at my neighbors in Brooklyn again in the same way. I started reaching out to them. I started becoming very active in trying to teach them and bring them closer to their Judaism. And that's what changed my life. In 1989, I made a second visit to the former Soviet Union, after which I was offered a number of positions to move to the former Soviet Union. I was offered to move to Moscow. Thank God I refused. I was offered to move to Kishinev. And then when the third offer came of Kiev, I said, God is sending me a message. And I went to speak to my rabbi. I was 25 years old, married with one child, who was not even a year old yet. And I went to speak to my rabbi and I said, I think God is sending me a message. And I've been getting these offers to go serve in the former Soviet Union. Nobody was doing it yet. It was crazy. It was like now that people are flying to space, it was like offer to become the first rabbi in outer space. That's basically the way it was looked at by my parents when they found out about it. My father-in-law, who almost killed me. And the rest of my friends and family, they all thought we were crazy. And we probably were. So we moved to the former Soviet Union at the end of 1989. And found a community that was totally, totally destroyed. And like I say, when God took the Jews out of Egypt, we say on Passover that God waited till the last moment. And if he would have waited another moment, the Jews would have totally disappeared and would never have been able to be saved. And when I looked and saw my community in the former Soviet Union in Ukraine, I said, wow, we begin to understand what it means to save a community at the last moment, when there were barely 10 Jews coming to prayers in the synagogue in Kiev. 10 is the quorum we needed for a minyan. Friday morning, January 3rd, when I got to Kiev and went to the prayers, in the morning prayers, I was the 10th man, 1990. And thank God there's been a quorum for prayers ever since. But just think about it. If we would have waited another year or 2 or 3, if there would have been anything left even to save of the Jewish community, since they were really, really, it was like the end, bottom of the barrel. So I got to work in Ukraine trying to rebuild the Jewish community. A community that suffered from the communists, from the fascists, from the Nazis, from the Holocaust, and then again from the Soviets and the Russians trying to uproot anything that was left after the Holocaust. And I was, thank God, blessed that I was able to be there. And I always remind my family and my friends and my students, if I wouldn't have been there, someone else would have been there. The main component was that God was there. And that I think that I was very, very lucky to be God's messenger at that time to bring faith, to bring Judaism back to the Jewish community in Ukraine. We immediately began, and it's very interesting to note that in Ukraine, the Jewish communities were rebuilt around education, around Jewish day schools. That's what gave us the success. Education, education, and education. That is the most important thing. I recall a conversation I had with Patriarch Kirill. There was the Russians have been trying ever since 1991. Have been trying to find ways to bring back the Soviet Union, to bring back the Russian control over what they call the former Soviet states, etc. And there have been many, many different and interesting, some comical even, attempts by the Russians. I'm not getting into too much detail now because that's not really the point of today's meeting, but there was one of those things was they set up this council of religions of the former Soviet Union, which I was invited to on a regular basis every year, but never went to. But one time I went because I figured there's no other way I'm ever getting to Armenia with my expenses paid. I said, I gotta get to Armenia. I'm never getting there. There's no Jewish community there really to speak of. And here was an offer to go to Armenia. I said, I'm going, I got to see Armenia. When am I ever seeing Armenia? So I took up this offer and I came to Armenia, and there was this, thing with the Russians sitting up front and everybody else sitting around, and everybody gets to make a speech and everybody gets to come to dinner with Patriarch Kirill flying in for lunch with us and then on his private plane and then flying right back and leaving us regular plain folk to understand that one day maybe if we grow up we'll get to be like Father Kirill and like Patriarch Kirill and have our own planes, things to look forward to in life and stuff like that. It was like, for me, it was very, very, it was telling. The entire experience was 2009, and it was really, I learned a lot at that meeting. But one of the things that they were speaking about, how the youth are turning away from religion and faith. And, me being as naive as I am and stupid as I am and thinking that maybe they really want to do something about it. So I went to speak to them. I said, why can't we try and get the governments of the former Soviet Union to allow private religious schools? That's the only thing that is going to bring youth back to religion, to faith. As long as there are government schools and private religious schools are illegal, young people are not going to turn back to faith because they spend their entire day in a school hearing about atheism and nothing about religion. If you do a Sunday school, so you can get them for a couple hours a week, but that if they would be studying in private religious schools, they would be spending 7 or 8 hours a day under some sort of religious instruction. It would change the entire future of the youth and the future of the religious society, faith, everything. I mean, I grew up in a religious school. We spent X amount of hours a day studying religious subjects, but we took all of the New York State regions and we studied everything that we had to do. But we ended up religious people because we went to religious schools, and there's nothing as good as education. He wasn't even listening to me when I was talking to him, but at that moment I realized that if you serve God, you serve God, and if you don't serve God, you can serve the state, you can serve wherever you want. But you're not interested in doing things that have to be done to really get people, to educate people, to bring people to faith and to religion. I spent the greatest years of my life in Ukraine. Majority of my life, 33 years. And thank God we were successful in building so much, bringing so many Jews. There's so much more faith and religion amongst the Jews that are left in Ukraine. If there were probably 1.5 million Jews living in Ukraine in 1990, and there are, before the war now, probably 360,000 Jews left, but so many more synagogues, so many more rabbis, so many more schools, so much more faith in general, that it just was changed the world. The Ukrainian Jewish community became a force in the world Jewish community. But the war changed it all. I was fortunate 3 years ago to be a part of an effort which brought to Auschwitz an exhibit called Through the Lens of Faith. Through the Lens of Faith was a very, very, very interesting exhibit that was put together by a number of people to show how faith allowed people in concentration camps to survive. They interviewed dozens of religious people, Jews, Catholics, and others. And hours of interviews to get that quote of what role did faith play in your survival in Auschwitz. It was a fascinating exhibit. The Auschwitz Museum never allows anyone to put up any exhibits other than their own within Auschwitz. Took a lot of discussion, but we got them to allow right out at the gates to Auschwitz. Put up this exhibit. It was a photo exhibit. We had a world-renowned photographer who photographed these survivors. And each one had a very, very short biography of the survivor and one quote of how what role faith played in helping them to survive Auschwitz. The budget that was made was that it would be cleaned once a week, since we didn't expect that many people to really be walking by. But it was visited by hundreds of thousands of people before COVID-19 shut down the Auschwitz Museum. And it was a fascinating experience for me. And we were actually in the midst of getting this exhibit over to Ukraine, to Lviv, where it was going to be exhibited at either the Sheptytsky Gardens or near the square right outside of the church. I think it's St. George, is it? Right outside with Sheptytsky, right, where the monument to Sheptytsky is. We wanted to bring it there because we wanted to bring, first of all, this message, but also to bring the message to Ukraine of what went on during World War II and how people survived and what role faith played. I'm sure many have heard of Viktor Frankl's book about man's search for meaning. And I think it was important for me because when war broke out in February, and I charged as the chief rabbi of the community, we had many meetings to prepare for war. Many meetings of the leadership of the rabbis throughout Ukraine, conference calls, Zoom meetings with others in Ukraine, out of Ukraine. What can we do to prepare if war will come? Most of my colleagues said, it will never happen. It will never happen. We're not a hierarchy, by the way. I don't control any of the rabbis in Ukraine. I'm there to serve them, but they're not there. They don't have to listen to me. And I was trying to convince them to prepare something. If it doesn't happen, all for the better. However, let's at least be prepared in case, God forbid, something does happen. 10 days before the war, we had a conference call. When it was finished, I spoke to one of the lay leaders of the Jewish community in Ukraine. I said, we got to do something. We got to get people to start taking this seriously. The problem was at that time, we had evacuated and brought back, because every time the Americans were saying it's going to happen on Monday, and it's going to happen on Tuesday, and it's going to happen on Wednesday. We prepared someplace. We prepared outside of Kiev, our summer camp. We had it winterized, invested hundreds of thousands of dollars, brought food, brought everything we can. We had a possibility of taking in close to 1,000 displaced internal refugees in case, God forbid, anything happens. 100 kilometers from Kiev, nothing's happening, right? It'll be good. And I kept on convincing people, you gotta be ready, you gotta be ready. And Thursday morning, we called all the buses that we had already ordered in advance to evacuate, and nobody came. No buses, nobody was going. War broke out, nobody is going anywhere. No buses. So I got whoever I was able to, I said, get your cars, vans, whatever it is, just leave Kiev. Get to the summer camp, 100 kilometers away, and we'll wait it out a couple of days, right? It was only gonna be a couple of days. What we didn't realize is that the Russians were coming in from Chernobyl. The road from Chernobyl to the Kiev-Koval highway, which is very famous because that's where Bucha, Borodyanska, Irpin, and all of those cities are. That road coming down is 1 kilometer from our summer camp. If you continue straight, you hit our camp. If you make a left, you go to Kiev. That's what we were. So Thursday, we got our people there. On Friday, we realized we had to get out of there. There was fighting going on all around. And by the time we got our act together on Friday, where we're going, it was too late because of the curfew that was implemented at 6 p.m., if I'm not mistaken, curfew that day. We tried leaving at around 4 just to get out, and as we left, a rocket landed right near the camp, broke many of the windows in some of the buildings, and everybody ran back into the shelters. We ended up evacuating at 7 a.m. on Saturday morning, taking along our Sabbath meals and everything that was prepared, leaving behind the men who said they're going back to Kiev to serve, and taking the women and children and traveling to Western Ukraine, near Lviv, to Peremyshlan. I was at that time in New York, having been forewarned that it didn't pay for me to stick around in Kiev, since I was on one of those lists that were very famous at that time. So I left the last day there were any civilian aircraft flying out of Kiev. I came to the United States with my family, and I think that we were able to accomplish a lot more in the United States by coordinating all of the aid and evacuation. There's an interesting thing happened. We couldn't get any buses to evacuate anyone. On Sunday, first let me tell you what happened on Saturday morning, and I just told this to, I just mentioned this before to the Metropolitan. I think I got a call on Saturday morning from President Zelensky's office. And normally I'm not on the phone on the Sabbath. We don't use the phone on the Sabbath, but I was on the phone all Sabbath trying to help coordinate getting my community and saving lives. And a meeting came from the president, a call comes in from the president would like to speak to you. It's okay. Tell me what number to call in. I called in. He didn't answer. I figured he'll call back if he needs me. And sure enough, he called me back and he said, Rabbi, I want to ask you to please reach out to the world Jewish community that they should pray for Ukraine's success in this war. And I told him, I said, Mr. President, we have discussed this many times. You know that we are praying. We actually have this tradition that I instituted years ago, that every day we say a psalm for Ukraine. The psalm that corresponds to the years of Ukraine's independence. So we started, let's say, right now we're about to celebrate, as we speak, the 32nd year of independence. So we say every day the 32nd psalm. We have translated to Ukrainian from the original Hebrew, and we say it every day in the synagogues throughout Ukraine. We added more psalms when the war was coming. But the president knew about this because I give the president every year the psalm in Ukrainian for him to say it as well. This is a tradition that began under the previous president, under Poroshenko. So I told him, we pray. He said, yeah, but now things are different. We see what we're up against. Their army is much larger than ours. They have much more weapons. Without God's help, we are not going to win this war. And I said, okay. And I said, I'm going to reach out to colleagues in Jewish communities throughout the world to pray. On Saturday evening, at the president's press conference, he announced this. He said, I spoke to that. He named all the heads of all the different religions in Ukraine and said, I spoke to them and asked them all to pray for Ukraine. Without God's help, he said, we can't win this war. And I have no doubt that sign of faith, that expression of saying we cannot win without God, I have no doubt in my mind, is what brought Ukraine the success and the victory. Because faith in God, having God on your side, is the only thing that can make you win in any war. But definitely in a war that, as the Archbishop mentioned, a war that's David against the Goliath war. There's no way Ukraine is still around fighting today without God. Actually, yesterday, I was at a very, very large, Monday, I was at a very, very large gathering of pilgrims in Hungary. We took a great part of our community and opened up like a refugee camp for them in Budapest. Actually, I was asked, why did you choose Hungary if Hungary is not so friendly to Ukraine? And I said, I wanted to take a country that I was sure they won't stay in. And nobody's staying in Hungary. That's why we're there. But actually we got an infrastructure there, so that's where we are. And I was asked this question about the war, and I keep on saying it. Say, as long as we recognize what's going to happen, where do you see it going? What's happening? And I said, as I said before the war started, what I see is God. I see God running this war. I see him running the world. But he does it alone. He doesn't need Putin's help. And he doesn't need Biden's help. And he doesn't need anyone else's help. God will do what has to be done. And he'll get it done by whoever he wants to make sure the right things happen. And that's something I think that's one of the greatest lessons that we can take away from this war is faith. The amount of faith and how faith has helped us all to survive. And as we heard, that the churches were full during Easter, the synagogues were all full on Passover. We have hundreds and hundreds of people coming to synagogues for every single holiday. And we have made this a point that every holiday must be celebrated at least in the same way it was celebrated before the war. We can't allow them to beat us. We can't allow them to beat us. And many things, having grown up in the shadow of the Holocaust, obviously we heard many stories. And as we were saving people and evacuating people and getting buses, and I started telling you on Sunday, I started calling for buses. I called some of the biggest operators in Ukraine, and they all said, sorry, there's a war. No one is going out to drive buses now. And I told a friend of mine in Ukraine, an operator of a big tour company, I said, I'm going to borrow a page from the Holocaust. There was a rabbi in Slovakia, Rabbi Weissmandel, and he said that there has to be a price for the life of a Jew. And he went and negotiated with the Nazis and saved thousands and thousands of Jews just by paying money and to save them. And I asked him, I said, what is the price of a human life in Ukraine today? How much is it worth? He said, what do you mean? I said, how much do I have to pay a driver to take that bus and evacuate people from danger? He said, Rabbi, there is no price. No one is going out there. I said, well, I'm going to make you an offer. I said, I'm going to pay you $250 a seat on a bus. Because I think the human life is worth much more than that. But I think at least $250 a seat on a bus. 40 seats, $10,000 per bus. He said, Rabbi, give me a couple of minutes. Called me back and said, how many buses do you need? And we got out thousands of buses, starting on Monday morning actually, thousands of buses, tens of thousands of people. Buses leaving from synagogues, but never asking for any identification. Anyone that came got on the bus and got out there, and the buses went and evacuated people just to the west. None of the buses crossed the border, but took people to Lviv. The buses that I did all went to a very obscure town called Kosovo in the Carpathians, where you could get out and walk across the border into Hungary. Thousands, tens of thousands of people were evacuated that way to different places. And they left, and it was an unbelievable thing to organize and get this coordinated in buses. And buses were there for anyone, and the money was there to pay for the buses. We raised money from the World Jewish Community, was covering it. We had to pay, besides the money for the bus, there were times we had to pay for security to escort buses if they were in dangerous cities, depending on where they were. Even in Kiev, we paid for military escort for every bus leaving from the synagogue in Podil to the outskirts of Kiev. Otherwise, it was impossible to get out before curfew, etc., and everything else. I still have thousands of WhatsApp messages from people throughout the world trying to help their relatives and friends. So this is really something that the Archbishop spoke about earlier, and that is how it brought out so much good and charity in people. There's another thing I think that's also very, very important for us all. And that is to thank God for WhatsApp. You know, during World War II, people could not be saved because they didn't have a means of communication. Communication was used to save people's lives. We knew where people were. Families, individuals, elderly. We had a fleet of ambulances evacuating elderly people from throughout Ukraine, evacuating them either to the west or to the borders, across the borders. Moldova, we had hospitals set up. I actually we have an assisted living home in Kiev that I set up many years ago. We evacuated the entire assisted living home to western Ukraine, to Irshav and the Carpathians, where they were there until the summer of 2022, when they went back to Kiev, as many others did. Many, many Jewish communities obviously will never ever recover from this war throughout Ukraine. The numbers will never be there. The educational institutions, the synagogues, the community centers will never be the same. Many people will not come back. Many people have left. Many of my students have died defending Ukraine. We found it actually was a point of honor that many of our students who emigrated to Israel and served the Israeli army came back to Ukraine to fight against evil. It's something that we're very proud of. Actually, just this week, it was publicized that an Israeli war veteran who came to fight for Ukraine was captured by the Russians and executed in March. Family man, he was captured and just killed. We're all familiar with the statements that have been made that there'll be no more prisoners of war taken by the Wagners. They're going to kill everyone. And we know from different statements that were made by the people that served with them how they were ordered to kill men, women, children, to kill everyone. Which again reminds us of one of the darkest moments in the history of Europe, the Holocaust. I said this on Saturday, the third day of the war. I said, this is not a war against an army, this is a war against the people. It was obvious that civilians were as much of a target by the Russian army as was the Ukrainian army, so to speak. This was not a war against fascism. This was a war being run by fascists. It is very, very sad, but I think that again, faith is what can help us by seeing God, by seeing how many people were willing to go out of their comfort zones to help others. I must say, the world Jewish community raised hundreds of millions of dollars. Hundreds of millions of dollars. And you have to understand, it's not an easy thing. Many, many Jews are still under what I call the Soviet propaganda of post-World War II, that the Ukrainians were more responsible for atrocities in World War II than the Nazis. This is something that many generations of Jews were brainwashed with Soviet propaganda, blaming the Ukrainians for everything. Even though the Ukrainians and Jews lived together for over 1,000 years peacefully. The only times that they fought were when the Russians instigated those fights, which were, according to different historians, between 40 and 60 years of that 1,000-year history. People tell me, oh, the Ukrainians are suffering. I say, no, the Russians are suffering. The Russians are suffering. I say this, 60 years out of 1,000 Jews and Ukrainians fought. But show me one good day for the Jews under the Russians of over 1,000 years. The Tsars, just everything against the Jews. But the most important thing is that I'm not up there. I don't know what's going on up there. And I'm not rushing to find out. Nobody's in a hurry to get there to find out the answers. Those that have, we always say those that have questions have a hard time finding answers. Those that don't have questions have a lot of faith. We don't have questions. We understand that God has something in mind. The world is changing. Ukraine is only a part of it. We can focus only on Ukraine without seeing the bigger picture. But if we look at the bigger picture, and we see how the world is going to be a different place, when this war is over? I'm asked this question almost every day. When will the war end? There's a famous story in the Talmud about a great rabbi that met the Messiah. And he asked him, when will you come? He said, today. He said, today? He said, yes. Today, if you will listen to the voice of God. God can make it happen today. And we believe that it can happen today. The war can end in a moment. Just like the beginning of the war happened in a way and in a form that none of us imagined that it would happen. I mean, when we saw that 40-kilometer column of tanks and military vehicles, I remember when I saw the helicopter swooping down over the Hostomel airport. I remember my feeling. I know the Hostomel airport very well. We passed it every single time we went to our summer retreat, which is right down that road. In Piskivka, if you must. It's by the border of the Zhytomyr and Kievsky Oblast, right on the Teterev River. So it's right down that road. I've driven down that road thousands of times, literally. Talking about Bucha and all of those cities that were almost totally destroyed, wiped out. It's unbelievable. As many times as I see it and hear it, it's still difficult to imagine an army just coming in and just blanket bombing towns and cities for no reason. I mean, there weren't no soldiers there, nothing there, just to put fear. That's what terror is all about. None of us believed it would be that way at the beginning, and none of us, and when God brings the salvation, it will also be in a way that we may not imagine how quickly it can happen. But it can happen today, and it can happen tomorrow. It can happen. We have to pray for God's will. We have to pray. I remember many, many years ago, I was invited to an international conference of army chaplains that met in Kiev, in Dom Oficerov. If any of you are familiar, it's across from the parliament. Me, young American rabbi, getting up there to speak for these international council of chaplains, but from Ukraine, many of us got up there and spoke about, the importance of chaplaincy and the importance of faith and the importance of religion, especially for soldiers during war. At that time, I brought out an interesting point. They said that the word capture, which in ancient Hebrew, the language of the Bible, is kibush, is mentioned first in Genesis when God creates man. And God tells Adam, go out and capture the world. He didn't tell him to capture it through war, because there was no one to fight with. He meant capture the world, develop a society, develop a place where people can thrive, where humanity can grow, where people respect each other, and just grow a world. That's what capture is all about. We humans have taken that word of capture and made it into a form or a goal of war. But God doesn't want wars. That's not why this world was created, for us to fight. It was actually created for us to build and develop a society where people respect each other, where they help each other. There's an interesting commentary that says that the Tower of Babylon that was created, that the Torah teaches us, by people who wanted to come up and fight against God. That's the way we're taught. They wanted to build a tower that they could get up there. And one of the words that they write is pen nofutz al pnei kol haaretz, so that we not be dispersed throughout the land. There's one of the commentaries to the Torah that says that was against God's plans. God wanted the world to be built and civilized and occupied by people. And not everyone should stay in the same place. And their goal was for everyone to stay in the same place. So God said, no, let's spread them out. Because God wanted the world developed. He wanted that world, people to live throughout the world. It's another commentary. that asks a question about that same Tower of Babylon. He says, what was wrong? He said, let's all get together. Let's make a United Nations. Let's all live together in one place. Why did God say that he has to spread them out? What was so bad about it? And he says, this commentary, he says, there were 3 words that they added to their plan. Those words in Hebrew are V'naseh lanu shem. Let us make a name for ourselves. So those words are what changed this plan from a good plan to a bad plan. By thinking about themselves and not thinking about others. Their goal was, let's build a civilization where everyone worries about themselves. God said, nah, that's going to be bad. Let's take care of this before it happens. Let's spread them out. If they're only worried about themselves, nothing will happen. Only bad things. And that's what war is about. War is me against you. When Cardinal Huzar passed away, so I was fortunate to be at one of the memorials, and I said the following words. The Torah tells us that Moses spoke to the Jewish people, and he said, Anochi oimed bein Hashem uveinechem. I am standing between God and between you. The Jews have said many times, I, the word I, is what's standing between us and God. That word, that Anochi, that word I, is what stands between us and God. Cardinal Huzar, for those that knew him, was someone who had no I. The I did not exist. And that's why he was able to be close to God. Because there was no I. There was no separation between him and God. I think that that's the most important thing that we are taking away as a community of faith. And the community of faith in Ukraine, which is united in many, many ways, in unique ways that throughout the world we don't find that type of unity amongst religious leaders that we find in Ukraine. One of the most important reasons is because we never discuss theology. We only discuss what we can do for people. It's very important. It is important. However, at the end of the day, we are able to unite and we're able to do so much and accomplish so much for so many people because of this. And I think that what we will take away from this war, the lessons we will take from this war, are the power of faith, the power of human faith, the power of human to help one another. Where can we find a religious leader that will go back to Kherson to help the Jews in Kherson? We have a rabbi who spent the war, throughout the war, stayed in Kherson. He never left. He never left. Till the Ukrainians came in, then he had to run away because he was afraid they would arrest him for collaborating with the Russians. But he went back actually. He didn't collaborate. Obviously, he was there for the Jews, for the community. But he was there throughout, and we were all saying, "Wow, how did you stay?" On Thursday and Friday, the 22nd and 23rd of February, when we were just preparing the war, and the war was beginning. So there were some rabbis that said, we must stay with our flock, we cannot leave. On Sunday, they all left from eastern Ukraine because they were in danger. As we heard, Kharkiv was being bombarded every single day. The rabbi that evacuated from Kharkiv, Rabbi Moskowitz, the chief rabbi of Kharkiv, he evacuated under bombings. He's back already, don't get me wrong, but he ran because we had to save lives. I had one rabbi that called me and said, Rabbi, can you get me some buses to evacuate my community? After I helped them and got them out and they were already safe in Western Ukraine, I said, I just want to ask you one question. What changed from Thursday to Sunday? Why did you tell me on Thursday you're staying and on Sunday you called me and said, get me buses? He said, we have to run from danger. On Thursday they didn't understand the danger, but they were warned, they were told that this is a war to kill. So I think that there's a lot that the world has learned, besides the fact that Russia was a paper tiger. We learned a lot about how God runs this world, how he is control. And we have to recognize that. That's the only thing I told President Zelensky, as I told you. We spoke then on the phone at the beginning of the war. We spoke again a number of times, and in October, I think it was, or November of 22, I told him, I said, Mr. President, I have no doubt in my mind that our success is because you recognize that without God we can't succeed. I said, you repeat that as many times as you can, as loud as you can. Let the world hear that there's a leader that does not say that it is my strength and my power that is winning, but it's the strength of God that's helping us. I said, as many times as you say that, as many times as you repeat it, that's how successful Ukraine will be in winning, because it's not us winning, it's God winning. We know that we are up against atheists, people that are non-believers. Even if they're so-called religious leaders, bless them and tell them that they're doing great religious things by going to kill women and children and by going to do the atrocities that they do. We know that God is on our side. We know that we're fighting against evil. We know that there is no God that says, go kill women and children. There is no such God. And as I said earlier, this is an interesting time for the Jewish community. This is the first time since World War I when there are Jews fighting against Jews in different armies. There are Jews in the Russian army and Jews in the Ukrainian army. Since World War I, this has not happened. In World War I, there were Jews on both sides as well, but there are many, many, many stories that took place. But as a faith community, as a community that believes in God, the Jewish community, and especially the world Jewish community to the greatest extent, is on the side of truth, on the side of good, and fighting against evil. And I hope that these messages will stay with us. They have taught us that no two democracies have ever fought a war in the history. Wars are not fought by democracies. Democracies resolve their differences by speaking, by sitting, by negotiating, but not by war. And I really hope and pray that we live very soon to see the words of the prophet come true. We'll beat our swords into plowshares, which, Archbishop, something that we said in 1994 when Ukraine gave up their nuclear arms. We saw the beginning of that prophecy taking place. We saw the prophecy of how there will be war no more. They will not learn war. Unfortunately, and I'll finish with this, in 2014, when Ukraine was being invaded, there was a lot going on. We had a meeting in the parliament. As you recall, Ukraine was fortunate to have President, Prime Minister, and Chairman of the Parliament all in the same person for a short time during the war in 2014. And we had a meeting of religious leaders in the Parliament. And I mentioned that it would be probably a smart thing to put police protection at synagogues and mosques, since it was obvious that the Russians were attacking and sending in people to attack Jews to make the Ukrainians look like anti-Semites. So it was sending people into Ukraine. There were provocations going on throughout Ukraine. And what I was told was, pray to God. We have no army. We have no police force. We have no military. I came out of there and I made a meeting immediately of the leadership of the Jewish community in Ukraine, and I told them, I said, God, I said, when a politician tells a rabbi you have to pray, I said, things are pretty bad. But that's what it is. We have to pray. We have to pray. We have to do the best we can to protect ourselves, protect our future, fight for good, fight against evil, but bring this lesson of faith to all of our people so that we may witness the words of the prophet, and there shall be war no more. Slava Ukraini.
It is my honor to introduce our next speaker, Alexei Holchak. Reverend Alexei Holchak, originally from Volyn, Ukraine, has been rector of the Cathedral of the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, Holy Ascension, for over 7 years. He has been in the priesthood for over 20 years, and he had the opportunity to build 3 new churches in Ukraine. While still a seminarian at the Volyn Theological Seminary from 1999 to 2003, he was the head of a scientific society named after Metropolitan Polycarp Sikorsky, the main activity of whom was the compilation of theological books and other research in a dogmatic direction. He is now a married cleric and has 2 children. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Reverend Alexei Holchak. Welcome to City Hall.
Christ is risen. Indeed, he is risen. It's really honor to be here for such person as I am. But you know, I unfortunately was born in Soviet Union, but I was glad to born in west part of Ukraine, in Volyn region. So I grew up in different different ideologies, I think. I recall one of the conversation was my granddad. So it was so bright, so I remember like it was yesterday. One day, he called me on the field and told me, my grandson, I need you to tell some secret. Do not tell anyone. Like, it's just between me and you. On this field, what you see, there are hidden weapons. Guns, Kalashnikov automats, like many of them. And it was, wow, I think 9 years old. Boy, wow, incredible, amazing, like, wow. Where is this? He told me, no, I won't tell you, of course I wouldn't tell you. Where is this exactly? It's crazy to tell the 9 years old boy, you know, where is the gun? And I asked him, why? Why on this field are hidden weapons? It's like, we are not warriors, we are not like some, I don't know, person who uses a gun. And he told me, when the Russians will come again and start killing us, if I will be alive at that time and I will able to protect my family, I will take that guns and you will fight with me to protect our family, our country. So the main words, not if, but when. So I grew up, I think in my blood runs like that words, Slava Ukraini, Героям Slava. So I grew up like in highly patriotic way, but go to the Russian speaker school, Soviet Union time, and they told me about Stalin, about Lenin, how it's beautiful, how it's perfect. And like, I goes like, you know, to the enemy spot and sit there and listening, what they're talking about. So I'm sorry, my English skills are not perfect, so I need to use some papers to read it, what I'm trying Following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, the Ukrainian people have faced immense challenges on both personal and national level. The destruction of homes, disabilities, tortures, rape, and the loss 10 of 11, even hundreds of thousands lives in the hands of Russian occupiers are just a fraction of the hardships that have befallen Ukraine and its population in these hard and difficult times. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church, as an important part of Ukrainian society, actively helps and does everything possible to support each person affected by the war. Millions, unfortunately, millions of injured Ukrainian souls and bodies turn to us for support, needing on our hands and hearts. in this struggle against the horrific consequences of the war, each of us must play our role, uniting, mutual aid and cooperation. That's why the current challenges we face are important tests for all religious organizations. Churches and other religious groups must respond to this challenge, not only demonstrating empathy and solidarity, but also providing tangible assistance to Ukrainian people. The calling of the Church is to guide society in such a way to avoid wars altogether. However, in the real world, such task is quite challenging. If the Church cannot prevent conflict or war, its mission to stand by those who suffer, who seek and need help, support and encouragement. However, the Church should not side with the aggressor, supporting, justifying, or even, unfortunately, blessing killings. There are countless believers in the world, but unfortunately, conflict and crime still exist. There are so-called nominal believers who, in earthly life, do not serve God, but instead of focus ambitions, the pursuit of power, which are worthless from the perspective of eternal life. Easter, what we celebrate a few days ago, it's a victory of good over evil, truth over lies, and life over death. For a Christian personality, it doesn't matter wherever he lives in times of war or peace. He must act the same way, and nothing should change in his behavior. He will seek any opportunity and the moment to serve his neighbor, and through him, Christ himself. Unfortunately, churches often focus in trivialities, trying to solve challenges in PR campaigns, but lose sight of the global problems, wickedness, including of the wickedness of Christians in the USA, in Ukraine, and even Russia. The majority of citizens are Christians. Actually, 65% in the United States, 83% in Ukraine, and 75% in Russia, respectively. However, some churches endorse the war in Ukraine, while others turn a blind eye to what happens right in front of them. Today, the problem is nominal abstract love and forgiveness. We love everyone and forgive everyone. It's easier to love the whole world than a specific person. We consider a specific event of our situation, we lack love for it. It should pain the churches. Any church and any denomination must speak their word, but not as a political organization that those words are diplomatically express and their opinion. They should speak as those who walk before the one God, clearly and unseriously, and even though it might be difficult. The truth is that Russia aims to destroy the Ukrainian people. It has constantly done so for centuries, as my previous speakers told. And now again, cynically, and in the eyes of the whole world, it kills innocent people, committing another genocide. What we can observe from some religious representatives. Shortly after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in March 29th in 2022, roundtable took place in the Russia, in Duma, initiated by spiritual or rather religious leaders of Christianity, Judaism, Islam and other religions. And unfortunately, none of them spoke from a position of spiritually, where God is love. Do not kill, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor, do not create idols. Instead, they declared devotion to an idol, slandering an entire nation, demonstrating their unity. The joint decision was complete support and approval of the actions of the Russian government and Putin personally in the hundreds of thousands of killings of innocent people. Not only in Russia, but also in other countries where Christianity is dominant faith. There are individual churches trying to establish equality between the aggressor and the victim. They conduct PR campaigns attempting to show that both sides are suffering. Yes, of course, they are suffering, but some suffer because themselves inflict aggression and others as the victims. To stop this suffering, the aggressor or his actions must be stopped. We have only one choice: to defend ourselves. I quote the famous phrase of Golda Meir, I think everyone knows this. We want to live. Our neighbors want to see us dead. This leaves little room to compromise. Every war puts the church to the test, showing its true fruits. In times of crisis, how much a believer will defend the truth and goodness, how much he can stand for up to the justice, is an evaluation of the activities and of churches, religious organizations. If the church has not assimilated the teaching of God, but the fruits you will recognize them, Matthew 7:16. And we see that individual clergy of parishioners behave disgracefully. It vividly testifies to the quality of assimilation of the gospel of Christ. If the church is inactive in such condition, it demonstrates its inavailability. And it resembles the fig tree that the Lord spoke about, condemning such as phenomenon. There are confessions that bear bad fruit, and there are zoos that are idle, merely observing, trying not to lose anything. But that can lose, what they can lose if their efforts are not aimed or achieving the kingdom of heaven, or calling to speak the truth, because the church are pillar of foundation of truth, not only speak but also to act. The Russian Orthodox Church created its satellites in 1992 in Ukraine, and the so-called Kharkiv Sobor, causing a schism in Ukrainian Orthodoxy with the aim of preventing and establishing a local Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Most people know that these actions were systematically and purposefully directed against the existence of the Ukrainian people, with the aim of their destruction. I will not delve into the stories about the direct support of Russian militants and terrorists by Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine, how they provided their church premises for stroking weapons, or how the snipers killed Ukrainians from their bell towers, and their endless work aimed at destroying the Ukrainian language and culture. All of this is already well known to each of us. However, our centuries-old struggle for autocephaly reaches its successful conclusion in 2018, when the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople granted autocephaly to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. This became a true revival to Ukrainian Orthodoxy, which was once again able to unite Ukrainians around shared spiritual and cultural values. In our time, when Ukraine has become victim of Russian aggressions, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is again demonstrating his strength and unity. It's actively involved in collecting and purchasing aid, disseminating the truth about the situation in Ukraine, and providing support to affected and displaced persons. You know, I know that you are tired, but I'm trying to tell something. Recall my child time. The worst nightmare from that time until now, you know, the worst nightmares when you woke up at the night and couldn't sleep until morning, you know, like the worst case, just imagine. For me, for myself, the worst cases is when I found myself in Russia. Like, it's the worst, you know, thing for myself. And I pray for my God, God, please do not give me opportunity or any reason to go to that country. And God bring me, you know, as far as He could to United States, you know, to another continent. But unfortunately, Russia came to my Ukraine again. For me, this is a nightmare. Like, in reality, the Russia came to my country. Fortunately, I didn't use that guns, you know, what I told about, like, from my grandparents. And my granddad is passed away a long time ago. And that house with that fields are cells for different people. And I think about that, it's still there, you know, it's not very fun, it's still there. And I think, okay, if the enemies will come closer to my town, I will call that, you know, that owners and tell them you need to search it and take it and protect your country and your family. And I'm so glad to see all that eyes what I met in last year. Actually, last year for myself was like incredible. I see so many God's miracles. God's miracles, like in reality. I saw them a lot, but most of them it was last 1 year ago. In February 25th, you know, when we came together after some speech in the city, came together to the church and make some prayers with tears. There was many people who came to the church and saw them first time. And I saw from them that they are definitely not Christians. They're definitely not Americans. Like, what? Who they are? And I think around 50%. That was from Turkish community. And the biggest miracle in my life, I think I will not forget that for all my life. That we prayed together, Christians and Islamic people, praying together for the peace, with tears, with smiles. We hug each other. I call them, you are my brothers, you are my sisters right now. We are much closer together than with Russian Orthodox Church, you know. They call themselves, oh, we are Orthodox, we are Christians. They are not. They are not Christian, they are not from God. They are from the devil. Just open the internet and see what they're doing every day. That's it, it's horrible. But every day I pray in the church with them. Christian and Islamic people come together because they come and they see the God that is love. And God, who is love, bring them to our church. You know, we sent a lot of donation to Ukraine during the many years, but you know, the second day, everyone knows that we collect the donations and send to Ukraine, but next day, like tons of donations they bring to the church hall. Okay, we call everyone and try to serve, you know, to put the boxes, label everything. Do it for a couple of days, and in Saturday, the first Saturday during the big war, like at, I think at 1 o'clock in the night. I was really tired, but the room was clear before the service, you know. And I started the service in the Sunday, and when I go down to the church hall to see, because usually after the service people go to drink some coffee, to speak, to talk to each other, I see hall fully loaded until the top, like the top, the tippity top. And people, instead of drinking coffee, they pack it, do it, and we do it again to the 2 o'clock in the morning, like. So, every day, I met so many incredible souls, eyes, hearts, Americans, from different other countries. They crying with me, they smiling with me. And they are my brothers and sisters. They are truly Christians, no matter what religion they are actually. For myself, for all Ukrainians are Christians. And I'm so glad that so many religious organizations and all that people open their hearts to do something, to make it changes. And you know, we send a lot of donation, many. It's hard to count, but I have approximately numbers. One day, when I received the call, I don't know actually who calls me. And, oh, do you remember you sent some kind of vest? We sent them hundreds actually, many of them. I don't remember who exactly I give that vest or another one. Oh, it saved the life. One of the young men, 19 years old boy. And at that moment, I understand that I have a life. I doesn't spend my life for something, you know, not important. My purpose was to bring safety, to at least save that one life. And it's incredible feeling. And you could feel the same, and you should feel the same if you are part of our big family who support Ukraine. Not by words, not only just the prayers, but physically. And it's incredible. Thank you. Our small, you know, on my place should be the bishop, Epiphany, you know, but I'm just a small priest from small parish. But even our small parish here in the United States also making significant efforts to help Ukrainian people. We sent hundreds of tons humanitarian cargo. Actually, one day I remember 3 fully loaded cargo, approximately 10 tons each. Like we, per one day, it was more than 30 tons. Like it was hard. So we sent it at hundreds of tons. Aid, vehicles, tens of vehicles, bulletproof vests, other equipment, as well almost of $100,000. Actually, it was, we sent almost $400,000 to Ukraine, to different purposes, different directions, to all the corners of Ukraine, to help Ukrainian refugees and even here in the United States. It's just one parish. It will combine all the helps from all the churches. What you did, exactly, I see your eyes. You definitely help Ukraine. You did. I see you in your eyes. It's give us opportunity to stay alive, to be alive, to continue to fight, and we will win. As a rabbi said, as a bishop said, Reverend Bishop said, we will win in this war if we will be together. Yes, we have different angles, you know, someone likes this president, someone that likes, you know, someone is from that religion, another one from this one. But what could bring us together to do the same, you know, purpose? Just one word, I think everyone knows this, what is the word is. Love. No matter what religion you are. if you are from God, you will show the love. You will pray. And you know, I received the message from the head of Turkish community. He's not Christian, of course, he is Islamic. And he said to me, Christ is risen. This is one more miracle. Why he sent me that? Because of love. He showed me his love. And I really appreciate for everyone who show the love from the God for our country, for my homeland. And I hope that that nightmare will never become a truth, that Russia came to Ukraine, you know. I do not want to go to Russia in my life, never. It's a nightmare, it's horrible. Please help us to destroy that nightmare. Thank you for your attention, and I ask you to pray for all those who live in Ukraine right now, and to all those who have been falling victim to war and suffering. We pray every minute for the peace, prosperity, and unity for our homeland, Ukraine, as well for all those who help and support our people in this difficult time. God bless you.
Just a few concluding remarks, because we are starting to plan for the next conference. So, is here? Yes, Mark Anthony.
Yes, I am here. Are we going to have the question?
No.
After my remarks?
No, just your remarks.
Okay, thank you. Shalom, Christ is risen. Dear gathered friends, a gracious thank you for being part of our event. Let your participation and attendance today be part of our ongoing prayer for victory and a just peace in Ukraine. And a special thanks to Rabbi Yaakov Metropolitan Boris and Father Rector Alexei for your words and witness. COVID has visited me as of yesterday. That is why I'm with you via Teams. This experience allows me to feel the remoteness and abandonment that many people in Ukraine are feeling right now during this war. At the same time, our faith in the Almighty reassures all of us of victory and peace. The witness we heard today from our speakers, all their work and our work for the betterment of the grave situation in Ukraine adds to our hope for an end to this war, especially in this Easter post-Passover season, which celebrates hope and salvation, Old and New Testament. Let today's faith in Ukraine, a witness to war, be the first part of many Suetonian steps for peace between Russia and Ukraine. Let us be inspired to use our Catholic intellectual tradition for the promotion of peace. Therefore, we commission our Catholic diplomacy students to invite the UN diplomats of Russia and Ukraine for a Seton Hall summit in the tradition of the 1967 Glassboro, New Jersey summit between President LBJ and Premier Kosygin, Brezhnev's lieutenant. One was held in the Pinelands and eclipsed as Governor Hughes' legacy for world peace by the Newark riots a month later. Ours will be held in the shadow of Newark, and our Ukrainian churches, St. John the Baptist, Catholic, and Holy Ascension, Orthodox, longtime centers of the Ukrainian American community. With God's guidance, the Suetonian Summit can be that event that starts the process of peace that will lead to the end of the war. Students Jasmine, Kennedy, Diana, and Mimi, start whatever it takes to make this happen. Faculty, administrators, and clerics, do whatever it takes. All of this road to peace is in your hands. Now I introduce our friends Jerry and Natalie Oak, Duyet Yaroslavna, war refugees from Ukraine to lead us in the old prayer for Ukraine. Thank you.
Христос Воскрес! Дякуємо вам. Така гарна зустріч, дуже серйозна, глибока тема. І я б навіть назвав таку зустріч в єдності, сила народу, єдності. Бачите, ми маємо таку єдність. Я вам скажу чесно, ми так хвилюємося досить, ми 3 години чекаємо, щоб заспівати одну пісню. Але це не просто пісня, а духовний гімн України. Тому Боже великий єдиний, будемо просити вас нас підтримати, благословити і разом з нами заспівати. Боже великий єдиний, на Україну храни, волі світу проміння, і освіти. Світом науки знання, нас дітей просвіти, чисті любові до краю, і нас, Боже, прости. Молимось, Боже єдиний, нам Україну храни, всі свої ласки щедроти, і налю нам стерни. Дай йому волю, дай йому долю, дай доброго сину, щастя, дай Боже народу, многая літа, многая літа.
Слава Україні!